All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Because this is a hybrid event, there are people probably wondering online what's happening, and we're a couple minutes past 6 o'clock. So we're going to get started. Welcome. Thank you all for being here. My name is Travis Jeffries. I'm the History Programs Manager with the Boise City Department of Arts and History. And we are elated, very, very excited to be kicking off the 2022-2023 Fettuccine Forum season. Before we begin, something very important, I'd like to acknowledge the ancestral, cultural, traditional, and unceded territory of the Shoshone, Bannock, and Northern Paiute people in the Boise Valley. I want to also remind you all, I should say, that this is being recorded, and the recording will be up online in the coming days, so keep an eye out for that. I mentioned that this is a hybrid, so we're going to do a Q&A at the end. If you would please hold your questions until the end, we would appreciate that, to give our distinguished guest, Dr. White, Professor White, an opportunity to get through his presentation. And then for those of you out in the audience, we have pencil and paper. You can write down your questions and somebody will come along. My lovely associate, Caitlin, will come along and collect those, and we'll do a moderated, curated Q&A at the end. And if you're online, you can write in using the Q&A feature. There are captions available, and you can view those if you're viewing online by selecting live transcript at the bottom of your screen and then selecting show subtitles. So as you all know, or many of you know, the Fettuccine Forum has been a fixture on Boise's cultural landscape for a very long time, and we're excited to be bringing you the latest installment of the Fettuccine Forum, and we're excited to be returning to in-person programming. So thank you all for joining us in person, and we have our friends from Meriwether Cider back there. Thank you, Gig, for joining us. So feel free to take part in supporting local business, right? The forum's possible with support from the Office of the Mayor, Boise State Public Radio, the Department of History at BSU, and all of you. And if you like programming such as the forum, please consider a small donation to the History Division's Heritage Fund. Everything helps. You can visit boiseartsandhistory.org or contribute to the Boise Arts and History Foundation at boiseartsandhistoryfoundation.org. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jennifer Stevens, Director of Arts and History, who will usher in the newest season of the Fettuccine Forum. Dr. Stevens.
Jennifer. I've warned them not to use that title, but they keep forgetting. It's great to see all of you back in person. I'm usually on that side of the Fettuccine Forum, sitting in the chairs that you're all sitting in tonight. So this is quite an honor for me to be here at the front and enjoying the 5th week of this wonderful job as the Department of Arts and History Director, taking over for a couple people, but most importantly, and in the room, Terry Shoresman, who was the founder of the department and who left a really incredible legacy that I'm quite honored to be here trying to carry out. So we have a really exciting season this year. We will have 4 different events over the course of the next few months between now and March. And the season, if we can get the slide up, has a title. Not that one. I'll tell you what it is before the slide comes up. It's called From the Margins to the Center of History in Idaho and the West. And the reason that we have titled these talks with this name is because we are trying to educate the community and bring the community into conversation about things like marginalization, omission, erasure, lack of representation in history and in contemporary life, society, and politics. So our featured speakers over the course of the next few months will in fact offer perspectives on these issues. We'll be talking about Black history, Indigenous history, LGBTQ plus histories, Asian American histories, activism, community building. And some of the talks will focus on Idaho, some will be on the West more generally. And of course, as all of you in the room know, many of these stories have been ignored or just not told very well, even when they do make it into some of our, I guess I'll call them master narratives or sort of grand narratives. They're included maybe, but tangential to the main stories. And so this series really intends to amplify these stories and start conversations in our community and give everybody in the community an opportunity to feel like they're represented here in our history and that they understand what their role has been in building this community. So tonight I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our speaker, who has been a friend of mine for a few years. We have common interests in many areas. He's a local Boisean, not anymore, but he grew up here, graduated from Bora High School in 1987, went to Boise State and received an anthropology degree there in 2001. And then he got his master's degree at the University of Idaho in 2005. So he's spent a fair amount of time here, I think you could say. He then spent a fair amount of years traveling around the country and the world doing archaeological work. He had basically a very long career in cultural resources management before he decided to go back. I'm not sure if it was a good idea, Bill, but he went back and got his PhD in anthropology. Did my mic go off? In anthropology? Can you guys hear me? Okay. From the University of Arizona in 2017. And can I give your news away? Okay, he has been for the last 5 years at the University of California, Berkeley in the Department of Anthropology, and he just got voted for tenure last week. So very excited for him. And, I'm going to say that a big part of the reason, other than the fact that he's fabulous and is really involved in public anthropology and public archaeology, that one of the main reasons he got that, if I may say so, is because of his fabulous work in the River Street neighborhood. So for those of you who don't know, Dr. White's dissertation and PhD work was focused on public anthropology here in Boise, Idaho, and looking at racial archaeology here. And so he's going to talk to us a little bit about that tonight. His current, now that for those of you who don't know, when you write a dissertation, it takes a really long time to get it published. And by the time it gets published, you've done 3 other projects. So his current interests in terms of research include community-based participatory research, historical archaeology, historic preservation, and heritage conservation. And in addition to these projects, and again, this really points to his goal of getting out into the public and making this stuff accessible, he's been active in using digital media to create and disseminate archaeological related content, archaeology related content. He's built several websites, including one on the River Street neighborhood, YouTube channels, and Google Earth digital tours. So he's done a lot of stuff. You can look him up and find a lot of really cool things. For over 5 years, he's been an active blogger, podcaster, and ebook publisher, and he connects with thousands of other archaeologists and students across the internet each month. So it's my distinct pleasure tonight to welcome Dr. Bill White.
That's great. Oh, what a great introduction. It's good to be in this building. The only time I've ever come here before is to pay parking tickets. So it's nice to be here amongst folks, welcoming me. Yeah. Yes, please. I can. Move this up closer. How's that? Try it again. Yeah. All right, how's that? It doesn't really like me, does it?
Should I just stand here and hold it?
No, it's all right. I can hold it for myself. I guess I'll just try to speak louder. How does that sound, right? I was commenting beforehand, they want me to use these lapel mics at work. I never do. I just speak louder. So I'll do my best to speak louder. I'm glad that I was able to come here to share with you a project that's really close to my heart. Someone who grew up in the city of Boise, someone who always wanted to be an archaeologist from the time I was a little boy, but someone who grew up in a place where there wasn't really opportunities to do archaeology. So it took many years to get to the point where I first got to do my first archaeological project, and I was totally fortunate that I liked it. Because now, as someone who teaches archaeology to students, I see a lot of people who wanted to be archaeologists. Then they come and work on a project like this, and you don't see them again because it's hard work. At the beginning and end of archaeology, it's always about people. We're trying to figure out stuff about people who lived before us. We're talking to people who are living alongside us about things that happened that weren't recorded in documents that you can't figure out from artifacts. And it's people who put this together. So I'll talk here for a while. I want to make sure there's plenty of time to address questions, but this project came together from a large group of really concerted folks, some folks who are here in the room who really wanted to see this go forward. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what I learned about the project, and then what overall we can all take away from this. So once again, this is about people. So here's Kate and her daughter, Olivia. The project in River Street was a field school. It had a cultural anthropology component, which is talking with people and recording their memories and taking ethnographic records. And there's also an archaeology, excavation, and artifact processing component. So students who were coming from the College of Western Idaho, they registered to do this anthropology credit. Students who came from the University of Idaho, they registered to do the archaeology component. But students had a chance to move between things. So when the project started, Olivia was supposed to be going to daycare. But one day she came to the site. Then she didn't want to go to daycare anymore. When mom went to go do archaeology, she wanted to dig. She wanted to find stuff. And so as this unfolded, Kate and Olivia, they realized that they really liked the artifacts. They really liked digging and they really liked finding things. They did participate in the interviews, but they really gravitated towards that. And Olivia was really sad to find out that these projects, they end. They come to an end at some point. So here's another photo of some other folks who really helped me. These are volunteer folks who came out. On the far right is Arlene. Arlene brought her companion. So Arlene's on the right and her friend has the sunglasses on. And I looked through my notes and I could not find their name because they came to volunteer. And within a few minutes, they left. But Arlene had been an archaeology volunteer for a long time. She'd been part of Boise's Passport in Time project with the Boise National Forest before the River Street thing came along. For her, this is something that she really likes to do. It's a passion project, something that she likes to volunteer and be part of archaeology. And so she came with all these years of experience working on these other sites in Idaho. And she also helped with us. Ruth, the woman in shorts, at the time, she was a student at the University of Dallas in the Anthropology Department. And she heard about this project and decided to come down and volunteer. She didn't go into archaeology. She finished her degree in classics. And I saw her a couple years ago and she remembered me just from this project and she volunteered out there too. And Louise is the woman in the turquoise shirt. She also is someone who did archaeological field school, studied archaeology as a student, worked at Fort Vancouver, came with experience of archaeology, but decided that that wasn't the career for her and continued to volunteer. And so the city of Boise, everybody here is really fortunate. These folks are all throughout your community that have been volunteering for many years on other projects that really care about archaeology. So, I'll focus mainly on what happened at River Street, but just know that it's a really unique group of people here in the city that come out and work on these projects, that show up on weekends. The kids bring their grandparents to work out. And so we have this whole transference of people with this experience, just volunteering, doing archaeology projects. It's really something that's an asset to the whole community. And all of that powered the ability to preserve the Hayman House in the end. And then, of course, the Hayman House, owned by Erma Hayman. I don't remember meeting Erma Hayman when she was still alive. Her son, Richard Madry, and I talked. He recorded some interviews, gave us some information about the neighborhood and about the house where his grandmother used to live. And ultimately, he's the one who sold the house to the city of Boise, and it was transferred to the Department of Arts and History to be preserved. So now we see the end project of this long campaign that started a long time before the archaeology project, because Preservation Idaho was interested in saving this house for a very long time. It was built in 1907. It's one of the few sandstone buildings that's still around in the city of Boise. And it's the only one that people know of in the River Street neighborhood. So Miss Hayman moved to that house in 1947 and lived there all the way till 2009. Raised her children, a few of her grandchildren live there. And it's really because of this house that we were able to do the project by doing some excavations in the backyard of this house. So the project that ended up ultimately unfolding was a collaboration between a huge number of individuals and organizations. There were folks who volunteered expertise that are archaeologists, professional archaeology companies. There's organizations like the Boise National Forest that part of their mission is taking care of archaeological sites. There's organizations like the Department of Arts and History that provided funding. And then the Capital City Development Corporation and Boise City Parks provide the permissions to do this work. But all of this stuff is happening against this constantly changing kaleidoscope of interests. So as I mentioned before, there's folks who really wanted to save that house, who had been working for a very long time, putting forward efforts to try and save this building. This to them was just another chance to demonstrate the value and the historicity of this specific place. The Capital City Development Corporation's mission is to help improve the economic livelihood of the city of Boise by helping guide certain kinds of development. The place where this is at in the entire River Street neighborhood for about 50 years has been on the map of places to get developed or redeveloped. And so they're very interested in, helping the overall city, but not necessarily if an archaeological project is going to stop them from doing that mission. It's a chartered organization, they have a mission. There's people like me who were students that grew up for many years without ever a chance to, try this, to ever even see what it's like. And then there's a whole group of folks, like I said, dozens of people who have experience doing archaeology. They really want to do it. They need opportunities to do this because it's something that they love. And then there's the city of Boise that is changing. I think I looked up in the last few years, 10,000 people move here a year in Ada County, even more in Canyon County. And every time I come back, there's not just an entire building, there's an entire subdivision built. So there's thousands of people who are coming here. And everyone who's been here for a while is watching parts of it just crumble away. All the things that we remember, all these places that we once knew, we're watching them all just evaporate. So sometimes there's places like this where all this stuff comes together, where archaeologists are interested, where preservationists are interested, the community, and all that stuff comes together to really help one specific place. And then of course, there's the competing interest of people who have political goals, economic goals, people who are very interested in spreading the message about this, and other people who don't necessarily want to hear about this. So it's a real world thing that's happening in a constantly changing place. So, you're going to hear the story. It's a specific thing that only happened here. It only could have happened in the city of Boise. And it's part of the history of all the people who live here. Now, of course, I was one of those people who had those research goals. As a PhD student, as a professor, I want to learn more about the past. I want to use archaeology to do that. It's what I've been doing for 20 years. So I wanted to use these methods that have been used on thousands and thousands of sites in the United States to recover this information about the past. But I also wanted to find a way to make sure that the people in the town where I'm from had a chance to participate and be part of it. Because archaeology and all these artifacts and these sediments and these excavations and all that stuff, it only tells one piece. The other piece, the human stories, the memories, those a lot of times melt even faster than the archaeological sites. So I definitely wanted to make sure that there was a chance for people to share their memories, because elders who live in this neighborhood, the one thing that they wanted is someone to remember that they had ever been there as it was changing. Of course, because I want this to come from a collaboration space, I wanted to make sure I was open and transparent, because I don't live in Boise anymore and I didn't own the Hayman house. I don't own the artifacts. And so the ownership falls on the people who actually live here. And then of course, activism, right? Because as we all know, as things have unfolded, remember this project happened in 2014, 2015. In the last 7 years, this place, we've all gone through a lot. And even if we don't talk about it out loud, We have gone through a lot. And so there's a lot of competing narratives and energies all around our societies in our country. And projects like this where people can come together are getting more and more rare and more contested. Okay, so this is one where, you got to take a deep breath. This is that professor slide that you should never show, but you do show, right? Because we don't know how to winnow it down to 5 words. We never have, So this was taking place in the River Street neighborhood that ends up being a neighborhood and a space and a place because it was segregated away from the rest of the town. This entire process started hundreds of years before anyone lived in River Street. We're living years and years after that, right? So this system was started a long time before any of us were born. We didn't create this. We don't have to live with it being this way either. Because these categories were started so that people from different European countries could dispossess folks of their land, that they could take the labor away from poor individuals in their own country, landless peasants sent off to be workers, African individuals enslaved. We all know that story. That's part of our own legacy, right? Because the whole thing was really about controlling power. It still is. Controlling power to money, to political strength, and to benefit slightly in the legal system. And so I don't have to tell everyone in this room, this entire pyramid, how it all worked out. But the thing was, there were some folks who were at the very top who wanted to set this up so that they could benefit. And it wasn't always just lords, and it wasn't always just wealthy individuals from European countries. And we do see that there is some kind of slight better treatment legally and socially under the law of individuals with European descent under the system, but it doesn't mean that all white people economically benefit. It doesn't mean that they all get to share these rewards of taking things from other people. And then, of course, we have these many different categories of others, right? So this whole thing has been baked in. It used to be baked, hardwired into the law. For the last 70 years or so, we've been winnowing it out of the law, but it's still in our minds and our culture. And so when you work on a project like this, you're in this space, right? You're doing this archaeology project at this Black person's house in this town that's 95% white, and all your volunteers are of European descent. And for many people, this is the first time they ever really thought about this whole system and how they became white people, or how come, even though they're white people, they didn't benefit or get privilege that they think that others are telling them they have, right? So it's a super complicated system. But what we see in the River Street neighborhood is an attempt to segregate individuals away from this other space of the city of Boise so that they can have individuals who are low-paid workers, who are unable to own businesses, unable to own homes, and disenfranchised. And this is a story across the United States. This is not unique to just the city of Boise. So one of the ways that that ended up happening is by stigmatizing the people who live in the boundaries of this neighborhood. So this is an overlay of what it looked like in 2014, as it was remembered by individuals who live there and are familiar with the neighborhood. And you can see the landscape has changed a lot. It's not individual houses anymore. It's these larger developments, right? That space was a place in the city of Boise that folks knew was the other side of the railroad tracks. Individuals who live in there are of a different kind of group than the upstanding folks who live outside. And in the beginning, it's an economic and an ethnic thing. Then it turns into a racial thing. But an interesting thing ends up happening where these folks who live in this neighborhood, they know they're being stigmatized by the others outside of the neighborhood, end up bending the rules of the wider society, where people who are of European descent end up having these friends that are of African descent, going to school with them, standing up for them in the schoolyard when they're called names. People, when their spouses pass away, come over as true neighbors and help them out in that time of grief. There's also a whole nother economy that happens for people who don't get to have a permanent job or even get to have a job. They share resources. They do things like canning fruit, sharing food, sharing clothes, taking care of each other's kids so that they can go to work. So this is the kind of thing that ends up happening in there. And in the stories that folks tell me, the minute they leave there, they know they're in a different space. So you end up having this unique neighborhood. And one of the things that I wanted to know was, what did this do to the people who live there? You know, how did this change the way that they lived? As I spoke with them as elders, how has this stuck with them? The fact that this was a refuge for them to stay away from the discrimination. Okay, this neighborhood really was able to be settled and developed after they constructed the flood control dams at Diversion Dam in Ararock. Early on, this was orchards that was owned by an individual who had a farmstead. By the 1890s, it was platted into lots where people could purchase them and build homes. But it wasn't really until after 1907, 1910, when these flood control dams come in, that you can actually occupy it, because the river that you see now has been channelized. It's controlled now in that space. It used to meander and it used to flood outside of those boundaries pretty regularly, basically every year, sometimes worse, sometimes less. So all those lots that are really close to the river end up being this riparian zone that's just trees and cottonwoods and places to fish and for kids to play, because you couldn't actually build a house on it. But once folks are able to build houses there, they start building these single family detached homes. And the earliest residents that moved there, because this once again was on the other side of a railroad track that's now the alignment of Highway 184, the connector, that used to all be rails, and there was a switch track with several different tracks. So this neighborhood was separated from downtown Boise, and on the side of those were factories that are all now, well, most of them are gone. So these folks lived on the floodplain on the other side of the tracks, away from the rest of the folks. And some of the earliest occupants are immigrants from Europe, Basque folks, who come and live in this neighborhood, along with working class white people. There are some African American folks, but by World War II, more African Americans moved there because of the war effort. Because this is the space where Basque individuals, immigrants from Europe live, it ends up being the place that is the only space where they'll rent to Black people. And after that, it becomes known as a Black place. And so there's all kinds of complicated things that go on that, you know, are the cycle of disinvestment that creates these kind of neighborhoods that end up by the 1970s being slated for redevelopment. And that's pretty much where River Street is right now. It's a space that is, you know, development is being concentrated in. It's been heavily impacted by development, and there's very few places like the Hayman House left. All right, so as an archaeologist, I mean, the key thing about archaeologists is that we plan the stuff and we take notes, right? So if you've seen the movies and you just grab the artifacts, that's not archaeology. We're not doing that. So it takes many, many weeks of planning. And then of course, because I don't own the land, I have to work with folks, right? So I start off by asking people at the Capital City Development Corporation if we can have, you know, the permission to do a project. And then I started collecting archival documents, maps. That was the foundation of the website that ended up getting created. Scanning and getting the reproduction permissions for all these different maps, anything that was associated to the neighborhood, newspaper articles, interviews, other stuff, all these different things to try and figure out what there possibly could be to discover. And so I had these goals, once again, provide opportunities for people to do archaeology, provide opportunities for elders to say what they have to say about this place. But then of course, because I know this is a racialized place, to try and figure out how that has actually affected folks, and then to figure out ways to share that with other people in the United States, because this story, it's unique to Boise, but it happened in pretty much every town the size of Boise across this entire country. So putting all that stuff together took quite a few weeks, actually a year. Now, one of the other things about archaeology, there's archaeologists who use different landscape clues and environmental zones to try and, you know, figure out better spaces where possibly humans could have been. And then there's folks like me that scan maps and digitize them and put them on my phone, right? And then walk right to the place, right? So that's what I did. I had all these maps, I digitized them, I scanned them, and it gave me a good idea of where there might be things. Now, just because a map from 1912 tells you that there's a house right there, doesn't mean that when you go to excavate, there's going to be anything there. 120 years of development happened in that time. And in this block right here, that's near the Hayman House, there's all different kinds of things that happened. Individual houses are transformed into apartment buildings. Those apartment buildings are built across several different lots to become two-story buildings. Then a fire happens and that thing gets torn down, and a backhoe just moves all the structural remains out of the way, and they put gravel and other kinds of sand and stuff there, right? So I have these maps that tell me there could be things, including this excellent map that showed the presence of the first recorded Basque handball court in the city of Boise, but I didn't know if it was actually there, because you don't know until you go out there and do some excavations, right? And then the other thing too about archaeology, the artifacts, that's cool. The dirt is the most valuable thing, because all those individual layers that are built up over years and years and years, it matters where those artifacts come out of. It matters how they're related to each other. It matters if you had these different layers that are continuous and someone dug a basement or a cellar right through that. All those things build up. That's the most important thing. The artifacts help us figure out dates. They help us figure out things that were going on there, but it's the soil. That's what we're really paying attention to. And then all the things that we identify, I wanted to make sure that they get saved and preserved at a museum for other people to look at in the future. So we got permission. The Capital City Development Corporation didn't yet have plans to develop those specific parcels. So in the River Street neighborhood, I had several lots, as you can tell from this map, several individual lots that used to have houses and all kinds of other things, garages and other stuff. And so, they were very interested in helping out. They were very interested in figuring out more about the city. The green parcels are owned by the Boise City Parks and Recreation. They also are very interested in learning about these sites, but they're also, they don't want anyone to get hurt out there. They don't want us to find, anything that's going to stop their plans to, develop it, right? Because once again, the city, we have all voted and chartered for this organization to help us manage these different places in our city. So once I explained, no one's ever going to get hurt. I just had my fingers crossed. No one did get hurt, right? Then I assured them there would not be gold. I don't care how many shows you've seen. There's never gold. In 20 years, I've only found one gold coin, and I've been digging a lot. There's never ever gold. We weren't going to get any valuable treasure that was going to, stop them from moving forward. So we got permission and we set up a field school through the University of Idaho and the College of Western Idaho. So field school ends up being this unique class where students go and they actually learn the methods, but then it's still school. So they have to, tell us that they're learning things, but it's also experiential, which means they have to actually do things. You can't just sit there like most of my classes and just listen to me till you fall asleep and then get a grade. You have to go out there and do things. And this was Boise, Idaho in July. So it was 100 and something degrees, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I wanted to follow up on all those goals of being as inclusive. I don't know if folks know, but there's a lot of really good archaeologists here in this town that do regulatory compliance under cultural resource management. They're very skilled and they help with all different kinds of projects here in the state of Idaho. Well, they were very interested in, showing what they know, being part of the program. Even if they can't be there for the whole time, they wanted to show up for part of the time. There's other government agencies and museums that are very interested too. And so all these groups come together to really help make this happen. Folks donate their time, they donate materials, and then students sign up for the class. And my good colleagues, Mark Warner, who's not here, Nikki Gorell, who is here, help teach segments of the course. And there were other students from the University of Idaho who helped manage different aspects of it. So it wasn't just me out there who was doing all the work. There was a whole group of volunteers, a group of students, and there was also a group of other folks who were kind of helping me manage this entire project, helping make this entire thing happen. Okay, so the results. So this is showing you the documented stuff that we actually have. Of course, folks like Arlene's companion that showed up and then never came back again didn't make it in the notes because we asked for folks to stay for at least 4 hours. And if they didn't stay that long, then they didn't sign the register that they were actually there. So we had quite a few folks who worked there at least 4 hours. We had folks who came with their kids. We had grandparents who found out that they didn't have to dig in the sun, that instead they could look at all these great artifacts, help wash, help dry things, and see cool things that they hadn't seen since they were kids. It was covered in the news quite a bit, especially because we did actually end up finding what's left of that Basque handball court. We dug quite a bit. We dug different shapes of units. We did different kinds of excavations, put them all together to figure out more things. We found things. We found handball court, and we found post holes from chicken coops that used to be there, and pits where someone buried a barrel hoop, and a whole bunch of other stuff, oven clean out events. Some of these things match people's memories. Some things people didn't realize, they didn't remember in any way how any of that stuff happened. But one of the things that we did figure out is, even though this place has been developed for 120 years, there were still archaeological sediments there. It wasn't contiguous across the whole thing, but there were some places where we could really get these things. Okay, so archaeology, how does it work, right? It's not like TV. We had this large area, and we have all these maps. They give us clues on where things could possibly be. And then we know from the logics of how people live where it's likely to be artifacts, right? People don't throw garbage right out their front door. They kind of sweep it off to the edge. They kind of throw it out the back, right? So we're thinking, well, maybe that's where stuff's at. When we see things like building foundations, because I cheated and digitized it all on my phone and I could walk right to the spot, we were digging these holes. So kind of the first step at a place like this is these different small holes that are about 1.5 feet in diameter, just like Battleship. You dig one down, you try to find artifacts. Is the soil intact? Is it all messed up? Can you even dig? Is there just a concrete block like that in the way? So when you find something like that, then you expand it out a little bit more. So when you do something like this was a trench that we put across there, because this handball court was pretty wide. It was like 20 feet by 20 something feet on the map. We couldn't really dig something that huge. Also, this concrete is more than 100 years old. If it's exposed to the air, it starts cracking and flaking, and it's been, it just gets dry and brittle. And so if the thing you're trying to do is save something and you have something like this, you don't want to expose it and let it all crack to bits. But you still want to make control, because remember I was saying those different layers as they're stacked up like a layer cake. We want to try to dig those layers off and see the artifacts that are in there, because we're all familiar with how products advance, right? Like right now, there's an iPhone 14 out. God knows we really need that. If you dig some dirt and you find an iPhone 14, gives you a good idea that that dirt was placed down in 2022. If you keep digging down further and you find an iPhone 10, I don't know what year that one came out, right? You can see that that one's earlier. If you dig down even further and you find the first iPhone or something else, or some telegraph wire, then you know that you're past the iPhone age. And this is what we do with stone tools. It's what we do with Roman ceramics. It's what we do with Native American ceramics. This is how we make sense of it. But the only way you can do that is if you carefully take those layers off in a layer cake. So then we take those layers off in a layer cake to figure out, is this just some concrete pad that was put there in the 70s? Or does this have artifacts that are contemporaneous with that time period? And so we get down to the bottom. This is my son that's in there. It's a good picture to show you about how deep we excavated. He was about 5 years old. Now he's in middle school. This is evidence that he used to smile for photos. He doesn't smile anymore when I take, probably because I have pictures of him like this in a hole right there, right? So we exposed it. We're able to find there's artifacts that are from that same time period at that same layer of soil. That's how it helps put that story together. And so you see instances. The person in the check shirt, Leslie Keel, was a graduate student at the time that was helping with the excavations. And I tried to find the name of these folks, but it was a couple who came with their daughter, and their daughter really wanted to be an archaeologist. And so she came out, and she was in elementary school, and we showed her how to excavate off the soil in those thin layers, to fill it up in a metal pail, to take it over to a screen and sift it and find those artifacts, put them in a bag where we keep track of where we found those before they go over and get washed. This is Vincent Brushkas. He was an undergraduate student that took this as a class to help finish his degree at the University of Idaho. And if you look close at that screen that he's working there, at that point, we have washed those artifacts. There's certain things that we don't wash with water. Things like metal, we don't. Bone, we don't. Some things we just dry brush. He's got an actual a skewer stick picking out dirt out of something that he's got in his hands. The kind of things that we find there at this place were broken bottle glass, bones from dinner, pieces of metal, some of which we know what they are, and some have rusted into we don't know what it is. window glass. Some of these things have marks of manufacturers of products. We can see things like Lysol bottles, and we know that the folks in that household doing something that requires Lysol. Because we know what Lysol is used for, we can make some educated guesses on why they're using it, even though we have this tiny fragment of just a Lysol bottle. That bottle being found at a lair that has coins, buttons, other things from the early 1900s helps us put together that at the early 1900s, they're doing these different things. They're wearing clothes that look like this. Look through different catalogs, find these button styles and fashions, the brands that made them, and the advertisements that they had, right? Because just like today, they were trying to get you to buy stuff in 1907. They've been trying to get you to buy stuff for quite a while. The messages from these advertisements, folks are buying these things, whether they need them or whether they actually believe this is going to make them a proper man or make them a beautiful woman. That is still the message that's sold. And that's why they choose that button over these many other buttons, right? So those are the kind of stories that we end up finding from these everyday things that are coming from these working class folks, African-American and Basque and other people who lived in this area. And then once we have recorded that, once we have washed all these things, then we put them in these bags where they'll be curated. They have been sent to the University of Idaho, where they're there at their laboratory of anthropology. They're stored there in perpetuity for anyone who wants to see them. The city of Boise retains ownership of the artifacts, but if folks want to see our notes, if they want to see our photos, if they want to see any of the work that we were doing there, you can go back and see it. It should be there 100 years from now. So all those things are meticulously recorded, put in these bags. We use acid-free markers to mark those bags. We keep all those things orderly with a catalog of things and track of where they've got, so someone can put the things back together in the future if they ever want to. So folks who were part of this was the full round of things they could do. And if you wanted to wash artifacts, that was your thing. If you really liked helping with the tables, that was great. If you wanted to find things, cool. If you wanted to work at the screens and pull the actual artifacts out, great. If you wanted to dig, all of those things were available to the folks who volunteered. And at the end of the day, you end up finding this community story, because we dug across all these different lots, because we kept track of all these different things, and we had these historical documents. We can look at these different households and make a guess of what they're doing. There's an excellent list made by Pam Demo in her research that shows who's living at these places. I had to, but I double checked that you were right. They made me double check all of it. So I checked it all. We know who is living there from city directories, census information. We have all this different information about it. Now we also have these artifacts that show you what kind of products they were buying, what kind of food they were eating. Gives you all these different kinds of clues. And in the process, everybody who gets to be part of this, they get to share in that discovery, and they can really take ownership of this thing that they all participated in and helped build. So then the other thing that ends up happening is as we're trying to share the word and trying to get it out to other folks, we also want to make sure that we are paying attention to what people are saying. And fortunately, in 2015, this town is absolutely open and willing and accepting of archaeology. They loved the project. There were a lot of people who saw it on the news who came by as visitors. They came by, walked around, were seeing what students were doing. There were folks who came out when it was 103 degrees out there and took a tour of the site. There were folks who took the tour and then signed up to excavate, right? Or realized that it wasn't just pure excavation. They could learn about artifacts. They could do a whole bunch of different other stuff. And so we had a lot of people who were very interested in this because of the connection with early Basque history here in the city of Boise. We had a lot of interest from the Basque Museum. And folks who own the properties, the city of Boise, the Capital City Development Corporation, they end up seeing that archaeology can be something that really helps them and helps reclaim pieces of heritage. Whoops. Okay, so some of the things that we learned those individual stories about people. That took time afterwards. Most of these folks had already gone to graduated, or they weren't volunteering. I'm the one who stuck with it for a few more years to put even more information to that stuff. But in the process, it was a good experience for folks in the city, folks who volunteered, all those folks who had been volunteering for years got another chance to volunteer and hope that there's more and will support it in the future. Talks like this, the website, other ways to get the word out also helps people recognize what archaeology does. And so when you hear this freeway has been slowed down by an archaeological excavation, just know That freeway is going to come and it'll be there someday, but those sites, those archaeological remains, every tire that drives on it, it's gone forever. So folks get aware of the stories that we end up learning from these different kinds of projects. And then fortunately, folks who used to live there, they get a chance to stop by and tell us their stories and participate in the project. Okay, so yeah, you know, we live in Boise, Idaho, right? You all live in Boise, Idaho. I grew up here. This is the thing that's like the behind the curtain thing of the city of Boise, right? And the city of Boise is not the only place. This is not the only place where this kind of stuff is happening, right? So what ends up happening is folks who are not familiar with thinking about this, who have never thought about a neighborhood or how come it becomes the Black neighborhood, they get exposed to that kind of stuff. These mechanisms that set up the differences between individuals who are considered poor white versus actual white, you know, they think about those things. Those are things that go into folks' minds, right? In the process, folks realize that in this space and every other space, we all really have similar and common threads, common interests. Folks are interested in archaeology. Folks are interested in their ancestors. Folks are interested in place, nature, all different kinds of things. And those commonalities are what make us see that the differences that are, you know, that are behind discrimination, behind racism, those aren't necessarily real, right? Of course, raising awareness of this vanishing neighborhood, contributing to it, and then all those children who did archaeology are going to grow through their life and move into different places and to towns that have public archaeology programs. They're more likely as parents to be part of archaeology. They're more likely to go see archaeological sites as they go on vacation. They're more likely to care. So this really builds a community's capacity to care about history. And then of course, you live with this proud thing that you helped create. It's that familiarity when we realize that we have commonality that weakens those memes that keep us apart. Those structural memes that were created before we were born, they weren't really real. They were set up to pit us all against each other. And when you realize in a place like this, that folks are fighting against this kind of stuff then, they're fighting against it still today. Now, I'd like to say that it goes out there and the folks who discriminate and are, you know, causing a lot of problems and don't seem to care about this kind of stuff would change, but that's not really what ends up happening. What ends up happening is the people who are against racism get stronger because they know they have friends. They know they have colleagues and companions and other people who care about this kind of stuff. And so they get, they're able to stand up for that and to support each other. So in that kind of strength, that's how a community is able to stand up to the forces that don't really care about this kind of work. So, you know, in the end, it was rooted. I wanted to share this with my town. I wanted to be with the other people in the town where I grew up. And I wanted to do this kind of traditional archaeology and connect it to, you know, people who have a connection to this, stakeholders, people who grew up there, as well as land managing agencies and other organizations. I'm an archaeology professor, so I always want students and other folks to learn how archaeology works. So I'm always open to talking about that, and providing these kind of opportunities are really important. But it also brings into view a conversation that it goes kind of unstated in the United States about race and what has happened to all of us living together in this country. Okay, so I mentioned that there was a website. There's also a free digital ebook that was created from the website that can be downloaded by anyone who's willing, that wants to take this information down. If you don't like reading on a screen, you can buy it for $4.99 on Amazon. So you can get a paperback version. It's all the content from the website. And there's a book that I have created that will be coming out in February that's not quite out yet. If you want to buy that one, it is full of a lot of very interesting archaeology professor talk. This is a lot of really interesting stuff from, you know, real humans, you know, talking about it, not people like me. There's no end to the number of people I want to thank for this entire project, all the folks who helped make this thing come together. Mr. Madry, who was, you know, confident enough to sell this house to the city of Boise so that it would be preserved. Terry Shoresman and Amy Fackler were really instrumental in the early days of getting the grant, administering the grant. I'd leaned on Pam Demo's research, was so excellent. Historical research, you know, you should really check that out too. Inventory of all these different houses throughout the neighborhood, and then trying to connect with that. And in the early days, Dr. Jill Gill at Boise State helped me with the interviews and helped me connect with a lot of those other folks that used to live there. Mark Warner and Nikki Gorell, I couldn't have done it without them teaching the class and having that through their universities. Shellen Rodriguez and Maria Minicucci used to work, I think they both used to work, I don't know if they still work at those organizations. It's been 7 years, right? I have COVID mind forever now. Sorry folks if you still work there, but they were really instrumental in getting the permissions and all the work, all the liability work through the University of Idaho, working over Christmas break to make sure that we had the legal permission to excavate at this so that we could have a field school where Renee Campbell, Lindsay Keel, and Michelle Singh helped manage the entire project. And then of course, there's 54 folks who hung out with me in the Great Basin sun, sizzling, digging up broken glass in the backyard of Erma Hayman's house. So thank them too very much.
Thank you so much, Bill. Professor White, congratulations,
Yeah.
by the way. The last time that Bill and I got together at the Erma Hayman house, actually, that was all still up in the air. I mean, I obviously had my fingers crossed and didn't really have many doubts, but that's a huge hurdle to get over. So congratulations.
Never count your chickens till they're hatched.
That's right. That's right. So we have pencils, paper. Anybody have a question that you wrote down that you want to share with us? Yeah. Okay. From Councilmember Sanchez.
Okay.
I imagine that the higher you have ascended in academia, the fewer BIPOC colleagues you have. What type of support have you received to succeed in your field?
Yeah, that's an amazing question and so insightful, right? I'm one of the founding members of the Society of Black Archaeologists that was founded because the 5 Black archaeologists that knew each other realized that there was no one to support us and that there wasn't any mechanism, and also that there was never going to be a mechanism unless we supported ourselves. And so that's kind of grown over the last few years, almost 10 years. And we really talk to each other, and we try to talk to graduate students about what it is to go to graduate school, about all different kinds of things. You know, folks are going through a lot of different stuff, even before the pandemic. And students of color have these really specific things that are happening that are, you know, varied. African-American students have these things that are happening at their different institutions depending on where they're going to school. So we try to make that open, meet with folks. We were already doing Skype stuff before, so we just switched to Zoom. It's like everybody forgot Skype.
Yeah, that's right.
Support each other with writing, letters of reference, trying to help people get projects, navigating folks through academia and into these different projects. I mean, that's how we did it. It wasn't because archaeology itself was, you know, going to support us. If we didn't do it ourselves, there wasn't going to be anyone. And what's interesting is when we started doing that in 2013, those other African-American archaeologists, you know, they cheered it on, and you could see how they had been here for decades and had no one had been there for them. And so now they're happy to see this go forward. So that was the response. That's what we did.
Well, thank you. So the next question, it's written in the present tense, but I
Okay.
think there's a historical component to this that we could discuss too, if you're into it. Who are the landowners in the River Street neighborhood?
Oh, that's an excellent question.
Are the residents all renters and tenants?
Yeah, so it changes over time, but overall, even really from its earliest days, it's mostly renters. That's what makes it really difficult to connect these artifacts to specific households. We can figure out what building it's associated with, and then I have a list of 25 people who all live there, because some of these places, the turnover is year after year. Sometimes there's families, sometimes there's not. Sometimes garages are rented out, and now you've got, you know, 617 and a half and 617 and a quarter because they've built more dwellings. You know, people are living in all different kinds of stuff. So it's really difficult to connect. The Hayman family lived there for so many years. Those artifacts that come from that time period, it's really only that family that could have been putting those things there since they own that property. Across those other parcels, you know, it's a range of different people. That handball court is constructed by a couple of Basque families that live on that lot for only, they only show up in the city directory for, less than 10 years, and then they move out of the neighborhood, and they've built this handball court that then is turned into a bakery, and then they don't live there anymore. And we found no signs of the bakery, only the foundation that was at the location marked as the handball court. So it was mostly renters. It's a great question.
A lot of really good questions here. So thank you all for your engagement. And we have a couple coming in from online. I want to make sure we get to this question. So this is from Shannon Regan. As a 1994 Bora grad and a fourth generation Idahoan, I'm so grateful for your work on this project. I now work at an independent high school in the River District called One Stone. I'm always looking for ways to engage, enrich, and educate our students about history. And I would love any suggestions you might have for engaging my students with the history that is literally right around the corner from our front door. Thank you.
Yeah, that's another excellent question, because, there's been several different research. I went to a workshop one time for people who wanted to do archaeology as a career, and it had probably 25 people. Most of us were students. Some actually worked in archaeology, and they had us write down the year we wanted to do archaeology and then the year we ever did it. And some folks, like, they learned about it in college and then they decided they wanted to do it. And then there was a lot of people like me that at 5, 7, 9 years old wanted to do it and didn't get a chance till they were 20 something years old. And one of the things that we found is if we can reach students in that high school age and show them that it's a profession, it's not a dream, it's not just movies, it's a real job. If we can show kids that are in elementary and middle school what you get from archaeology, how it all works, those kind of activities have been really influential to supporting archaeology in the United States. At UC Berkeley, we have a community outreach program where we bring these different toolkits to classrooms. They're designed for, if they're little kids, then we have different kinds of things with artifacts and excavation through these little mock portable excavation things that we've got. And then for middle school kids, a lot of that is STEM research. So a lot of geometry, a lot of mapping and using tape measures and compass work. And then for high school students, it's college prep and getting students to go on to college. So it depends on the age that they are. Probably the easiest way that has ever existed is asking archaeologists Skype into your classroom. That was going on before the pandemic. It's a real thing that was happening for quite a bit. And there's organizations like UC Berkeley's Archaeological Research Facility, where there's, I specialize on this American West archaeology. There's Egyptologists, there's folks who work in Greece, there's people who work in Crete. You can find them and then ask them to Zoom into your class. And most of us will ask you, what are they learning in social studies or, math or science, and then gear our talk towards, if it's a chemistry teacher, have an archaeologist that analyzes the chemical constituents of ceramics or human bone to talk to your class about that and how it all works. So that's the easiest way to ask someone to Zoom into your classroom.
I think you just signed up as a volunteer to Zoom into a lot of classrooms.
I've been doing it.
So.
I already been doing it. I've been doing it.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that Bill would be happy to do it. Professor White would be happy to do it. It is. Yeah, this is being recorded. There you go.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. That'd be great.
Yeah. One more, because we're a couple minutes over, but I hope people won't mind. I think it's for a good cause. What can we all do to support more diversity in anthropology, archaeology, and also support more public archaeology? I think that's a great question. Really apropos of this, because I think despite, being a Berkeley professor, right, you really cut your teeth as a public archaeologist, as a public historian, as a public servant, right? So could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, the best thing that folks can do to support archaeology is to support historic preservation regulations. So in the United States, there are these laws that govern projects that could be considered an undertaking under the federal law. In the state of Idaho, there's not a state law that triggers an evaluation for cultural resources, because all of these things, like what I was doing out there is what I used to do as a cultural resources archaeologist. And then I just had volunteers. This is the archaeology in the United States that we already do. And when you have states that don't support historic preservation laws, that means that there's not an opportunity for communities to ever even have anything recorded of their archaeological heritage, right? It's so easy to just mow through whole neighborhoods, whole districts and all kinds of stuff. So supporting regulations, the city of Boise actually ends up being one of the best exemplars of historic preservation by being really quick to preserve the North End Historic District as a historic district under the National Historic Preservation Act. Folks got together in the 60s and 70s and made that a historic district. And they were some of the first ones in the United States to make a historic district. So those are the mechanisms that really help support archaeology. And then public archaeology. The Passport in Time project was not funded by the federal government, and there was a lot of support for it on communities, but the National Forest, you can imagine, over those millions of acres, has their group of archaeologists.
I was warned that the lights
They didn't
go
even
out
do
at
last
7
call.
o'clock.
Like usually it's like last call and then you pay up and
He needs to pay
then
the
they
bill.
turn the lights out, right? Like usually you pay your tab and then the light. I think that's a sign from all the gods that it's over, right? So that's the best way. And when you see these kind of movements to axe historic preservation, axe your Department of Arts and History, other kinds of organizations, when you start seeing that kind of stuff bubble up, those folks show up and say, we care about archaeology. We care about it.
Well, thank you so much for addressing those. Thank you so much for asking them. Really wonderful questions. Thank you for your time and attention, donating part of your first Thursday evening with us. Get out and enjoy it. Thank you so much. Thank you. Professor William White, thank you so much. I want to mention before people head out or on your way out, October 21st and 22nd at 12, we're going to be partnering with Preservation Idaho to offer tours of the Erma Hayman House and the broader River Street neighborhood. So keep an eye out. October 21 and 22, so there'll be 2 tour offerings, both at noon. So we're looking forward to that, and that will be out on our social media and Preservation Idaho's social media in the coming days and weeks. So keep an eye out for that. And also come back and join us. We'll hope you'll join us on November 3rd at 6 p.m. for former chairman of the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone Nation, Darren Perry, who will present History, Healing, and Restoration, which is a presentation that's based on his amazing book, which I have read, The Bear River Massacre, A Shoshone History. Really important topic, and I encourage you all to come out. Thank you so much.